I am sitting here with Forrest McCuller, and you have a project, don't you? Welcome to Method to Madness.
It's nice to be here.
Forrest brought this stuff into the studio, and you can't see it on the radio here, but it is big, burly plastic box of various 1980s origin with the classic gray and green and odd colored buttons. Plus, it has other things stuck onto it, various knobs, some output keys, and then where the keyboard would be, there's just a clear panel showing all of the kind of workings on the inside. And then what are those blue things over there?
Those are
those
buttons.
Switches?
Those are more buttons.
More buttons?
Yeah.
Are they kind of like 4 keys, or what do they do?
No, initially that was the idea, but I ended up just making it more insanity. It controls.
Do they modulate things? Oh,
they control the insanity in various ways that are undefined.
So different electronic parameters. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a circuit bent keyboard, but that's not all it is. It has some pretty specific functionalities.
Okay. What is a circuit based?
Its circuit bending is.
Oh yeah, it's circuit bent. Okay, so explain that.
That means I took an existing machine and I opened it up and I modified the circuit. I added things to it so that it would do things it was never intended to do.
Right.
So I tend to mess with stuff that is not intended to generate any sounds at all. That's kind of always been my main focus, is like shoebox tape recorders. But I saw this keyboard and I knew that I could do something kind of special with it. And then I put my mind to it and I made this.
Wow. So this is, and then what is the other component? It is a component that you play with your body.
Yes. Yeah. So the idea with this is that it's a keyboard that I play with a special suit.
Yes. And the suit is actually a controller. See, when you said a keyboard suit, I had a vision kind of like a guitar where I had like the suit in the middle of it. I don't even know what I had in mind.
The notion with this is that I'll never have to touch it during performances. I can just set it and then I can stand back, and as I move around, if I raise my arms or if I gyrate, I don't know, if I
So it senses movement. How does it do that?
Ball bearing tilt switches.
Cool. Background, you are a musician. Are you making music with things that aren't specifically made to make music?
I've been building electronics for about 10 years now. I started right when I was 19, so a little more than 10 years now, and just developed all these practices. I'm not an engineer by any means. I don't know the math involved very much. I just have a few principles that I can use in different ways. More of a technician, if you want to put it that way. I really just began out of interest. I started taking things apart. I read a little bit, but just messing with things, trial and error. I broke a few things, and then right at the point where I became notorious among my friends for breaking good machines, I started to get really good at it, and it's kind of just expanded.
When you are playing with a tape recorder, for example, what are you doing to it? How do you modify it?
In the strict sense, I make synthesizers out of tape recorders. Again, I have friends who get angry when they hear me say that, because they love synthesizers and they think of synthesizers as something that can make really smooth, nice noises. And I don't know. I approach it more in terms of technical capabilities. I know I can do a certain thing with it where when I do this, something will happen. And I'm not quite sure what that will be. So I don't approach it at all like Bob Moog did, where in the end he knew just how his things would sound, that he would be able to create a great trombone sound or mimic an organ and, sorry.
No, because like that is about different kind of synth waves, those subtractive synths, and like kind of modulation of.
Yeah, well, all of his processes, everything that goes on in the machines that are made professionally and called synthesizers, it's a particular function. There isn't that much variation, even just from one to another manufacturer. And it's just very specific in terms of what components are used. I find some basic functionality, and then I figure out different ways that I can modify it or I can trigger it. So what I end up with is something that's just...
So it's more what people would call experimental or noise sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily looking for some kind of like, okay, we're having a rhythmic structure here. This is
no,
I
do.
You do.
I do. I really want to control the stuff that I build. I just want to. I want to control it, but I don't want to have perfect control. I mean, if I picked up a guitar, then if I hit a note, then there would be a note.
Right.
With this sort of stuff, I don't really know what to expect when I'm going in, but it is predictable. No matter how complex a machine, if you turn it on and you have the same settings and the same amount of power going through it,
right?
if you do the exact same actions, you should get the exact same results. I can't think of an exception to that.
Well, okay, so say you are messing around with a tape recorder. What's a typical thing you would do? You would manipulate the tape head to make a different sound?
No, I would just mostly I can make pedals with it. I can make like overdrives are very easy. But mostly what I do is I just mess with those circuits.
Okay.
And that's how I make a.
So we're not talking like a mechanical tape recorder. We're talking about a tape recorder with a bunch of circuits in it that can be exploited if connected different ways. Is that?
I think they're all that way.
They're all that way?
Yeah, they all have a circuit board in the back. It'd just be
I
amps.
don't know. I haven't taken apart
It's just really messing with like old amps and old components inside.
Okay.
It doesn't even really matter. Well, I have a basic understanding what I'm looking at. When I look inside of a tape recorder at this point, I have a strong basic understanding, I suppose. But I can experiment and make something nice. Like for instance, I say I like to have control. The last thing I built was I took 2 tape recorders and a radio and I put them into a suitcase and I built a synth interface on the front, so a synthesizer-like interface on the front with a bunch of knobs. And
so did you have inputs where you had patch cords and stuff, or no?
No, it was just all internal in terms of patching control voltage.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was able to plug drums into it.
Okay, like a drum machine?
Well, in a sense, a drum machine. When I hit the drums, they
okay.
make a sound, but it doesn't sound like a drum.
Right.
It sounds like an altered version of that drum sound. But it was made specifically for drums. And if you try to use anything else with it, it doesn't work very well. Drum machines work okay. But if you try to use anything else with it, because just the nature of it, like if I played a tonal instrument through it, it wouldn't work. It was made very specifically for that sort of thing. And the controls were very difficult to use. I knew how to set it. It took some time to learn. But no one else did. And if you just mess around with it randomly, it would sound horrible. But you can get really interesting effects out of it. You can get great performative.
That's very interesting. It made me think of that. The interfaces for instruments, it's kind of almost like the marketing of how somebody's going to use it, right? Make something pretty, it's smooth, it's plastic or whatever. Like if, say, you were going to produce something. Yeah. Like you were Tascam or somebody, like Teenage Engineering or who knows what. But
yeah, theirs are pretty.
But like in some ways, the prettiness helps you play with it without too much knowledge of what's on the inside.
That's true. There are certain pitfalls. It can be... Too simple is never really a problem so long as it sounds nice, but it can certainly be too complex. And that can make it difficult to actually play.
Right.
So the question becomes, especially with like new instruments like Teenage Electronics. I don't want to, but they're amazing. They're amazing. I don't want to.
Don't say anything.
I don't want to say anything bad about them, but if you create something too complex in terms of interface, which they are certainly not doing, they're fine people. Yeah. But if you make something too complex in terms of interface,
but they do have that thing where it's like, okay, here's a sewing machine. So it's not a sewing machine. There's nothing involved with this. One of their little guys has a sewing machine, so I think it's the beatbox drum one. I'm not certain. The needle goes up and down, so it kind of gives you a picture in your head of what it's doing on the inside.
Yeah.
Although,
like, is it a digital display of that?
It's a digital display.
Oh, okay.
Everybody knows that there isn't actually a sewing machine in there.
Yeah.
But it does. It's an indicator of when the beat is hitting.
Well, and then the question becomes, I think, are they making it for the musician to enjoy alone, or is it made for an audience to enjoy watching? Because unless you're pointing a camera down at that sort of thing, everyone doesn't see the sewing machine.
No, but it's a handheld thing, so it's probably for you mostly.
Yeah. My focus is on interface. I tend to start by saying, what do I want to look like? What do I want people to see happening? And the net effect in the past has been people saying they just have no idea what's going on while I play. They don't know what I'm doing. That's why a keyboard suit. That's why drums, because you can see me hitting the drums and something happens.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I'd much rather that than just a giant panel of knobs and I'm turning it and sounds are happening, but people can't really participate in that.
Right.
The same way, like, say what you will about hair metal, it's not my thing, but you can see when the guy hits the guitar sound happens. When the guy hits the drums.
Sometimes you can even feel the waves coming out. Yes.
Drum sound
that
happens.
appeals to people, right? So, yeah.
I think so. I think so. I want it to be interactive in a certain sense.
Well, okay, so here's the thing is we go to music because we want to experience life.
Yeah.
And when you see a musician and they're killing it on stage and like people are responding, so like the audience is definitely part of the performance. You see that and you see that interface and you see like the culture basically being made at that point.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, this is life. This is success.
That
like,
feels nice for me.
That feels good for you because here's artistic success being demonstrated.
Well, some people use iPods or a laptop. I don't encourage that, but I won't discourage it either.
Right.
I have a neurosis that I want everything to be happening right there. I don't want anything pre-recorded. I like there to be a visual element. I like there to be a performative element. And that's just what I like. That's what I like. And that means a suffering in quote-unquote sound quality in every case, in every single case.
Oh, I see. Because if you can't control something, it is... Oh, but you could make a mistake or something could happen, short out or something. What?
Well, to my mind, even, a warm recording, the Beatles didn't have as nice sound quality as Aphex Twin has. Digital is the nicest sound quality, in theory. There's no flaw. Does that make sense?
No hum, no buzz?
No hum and, nothing lost in the recording either.
Oh, I see.
It's straight across.
No clipping.
So if that's your ideal of sound quality, if everything's there and it's perfect...
But there are things lost. You engineer something and it gets compressed, and so then like you lose some of the spectrum of sound.
Well, I mean, his finished product. Whatever he makes and says this is Aphex Twin, that's what you get if you go see him, probably.
Yeah.
As best as the engineer live can do.
The live engineer. Okay, yeah.
But I have no live engineer. I'm the live engineer.
I am the live engineer.
Yeah, I'm the constantly... breaking machine among constantly breaking machines.
It sounds like a byline of sorts.
I like to make things where I can't possibly control everything. I like to work with people who refuse to make something perfect, because then if you make a big enough body of work, every once in a while there are things that are perfect and that can't be replicated.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So it's like I can never hit that note again, or that machine is broken, or like whatever it is.
Yeah. It's like old blues recordings where like so and so musician, I don't know who I'm thinking of, but like, would sing toward the wall and then you get the delay. Well, try doing that again. Try getting that recording again. You know? In the early days of recorded bands, there was often one microphone in the room, and it would be a really expensive, nicer microphone than we have access to now. A lot of times you get what's in the room, and that's a nice effect. That's nice to work with. And, I've had nice influences. I've worked with people who, they've had like so little regard for the very notion of popularizing something that they have worked really to satisfy themselves. That's a nice experience, especially if I don't feel that way. I don't want to just do things only for myself. I want to do something good and have people see it and enjoy it themselves. I'm not antagonistic toward the audience, but boy, it's a nice influence to have around you. It's a nice pressure to feel for a while. It teaches you to satisfy yourself sometimes, because you can forget that completely. And all the pressure is to forget about yourself. And to, for instance, if you want to make money in music, boy, it's still possible. Pick an old genre of music that people used to play. And if you play that type of music, especially the older it is, because, then it's kind of scarce and there's a huge built-in audience and you can tour forever. So that is some people's dream. Some people love country music, old bluegrass, what have you. Well, a bluegrass band has a mandolin, could have a banjo, and it has an upright bass, and it has a guitar player. And so we have to have those things. I want to stray from that. I want to play tape loops. No tape loops. You know what I mean? Then you get John out of here. He wants to play tape loops. We're not going to have any. This is my. This is fun. Something I do for fun. Mostly what I do is art, but a lot of the art I do is rigorous, and it's fun in passing, fun in times, but mostly it's work. Film's a lot of time alone in a room.
Yeah.
And this is time alone in a room, too, a lot of times. But it's free. There's no point. There's no money. I'm not going to make any money. I could sell this and make a little bit of money, but it wouldn't be a living. So that's nice. That's liberating.
Let's talk about the perceived non-monetary value of art. Why is
art not making any money?
Why is art not making any money?
When I look back through the lives of famous writers and painters, there's a lot of poverty and starvation as well. I think what's a question now is why should we continue to treat people who are artists that way? There's a really difficult problem. How do you determine who's worth a damn as an artist? Because it's not objective. It doesn't have an objective, if you want to put it that way. I don't know the value of art. I know what it is for artists, and I know how integral it is to some people's lives, that some people won't give up even if they're going to starve. Or starvation's not so much a problem among the people I know. It's more a matter of living in insecure housing situations.
Right.
Or not being able to make really the art that they want to make, really struggling to make the art they want to make.
Or not having the resources. You can't be recognized if you don't have some resources.
Can't be recognized?
Well, say you wanted to make...
Yeah, it's hard to get your stuff out there. Yeah.
You want to make something that reached a lot of people, for example. Like, sometimes you're prevented by economic circumstances.
Yeah, it may be made worse by the internet in a certain sense. Now there's a flood. What I'm saying is there are so many bands, but if you lived in a city, you can get it, and still you can get a pretty good sense of what's going on in your city. But now, if you're 14 years old and you want to get into music, you can go on the internet, right? You can learn a lot, but you can't learn it all. And suddenly you're exposed to that which is similar and going on in Denmark, that which is just going on in Germany, and no one seems to be making any money off of it. But if you come at it as somebody new who's unestablished, especially if you're not, if you weren't doing it in the 80s and you didn't get on some label that would really promote your stuff back then, and get you associated with something, cool or good, something good, then how do you develop that narrative which makes people feel that they understand what you're doing long enough to spend the time and really get to appreciate it?
Well, there's some people who's like, well, I got famous on Vine or whatever, but I just feel like
is that famous?
Is that famous, really? I don't know.
Or is that just seen? Is that just experienced for a moment? There maybe is a more refined definition of fame that we could give this, where a person actually has the power to control their output and speak their mind, and that they be given enough time that they can be understood on some grounds of their intentions and their principles and ideas. The promise of fame is spurious in all cases. The notion that it makes a person powerful, that they stand on stage and talk to a lot of people and present something to a lot of people. They're always, the people who built and own that stage are going to have certain expectations. The people who booked their tour are going to have certain expectations. Certainly. Just getting signed to a label means certain expectations of consistency. Particularly, an example could be like a major label. They can reject your album, they can make you re-record it from square one. And if you sign a multi-album deal, then you have to do that 5 times.
All right, what about this idea of interface? Okay, so you have all of these things that are attached to this machine, and like, what is this cable for, and what are the...
Well, I thought about it in terms of what I wanted it to look like. I had the screen jacket already, and I have a matching hat. I haven't shown you the hat yet.
No, you have not shown me the hat.
But it matches. It's the same color. And I knew that I wanted to use that because I didn't have another jacket. But I found the keyboard. I found that at the place I was living, the ghost ship. But I found this keyboard. The person who owned it gave it to me. Said they weren't doing anything with it, and if I was going to do something amazing with it. But so I knew I could circuit bend this. And
so this is just looking at it, it's a very old model.
It's old. It's been around, and a lot of the keys were broken on it. And so I just got to thinking, what can I do to trigger keys? And it hit me ball bearing tilt switches. I had found one.
So what is a ball bearing tilt switch?
It's when you're playing pinball, it doesn't have a ball bearing tilt switch in it, but it does have a tilt switch. So if somebody kicks the side of the pinball machine to help you so you don't lose, when the ball's going down the hole, then it goes tilt and gets angry. And so there's an element to do that. There's a piece of the machine. There's a part. I don't want to use the mercury ones. So but I knew about ball bearing tilt switches because I had taken apart some sort of like baby rattle type toy at some point, and it had this little element in it, and
A tilt switch?
a tilt switch. When you turn it to one side, it's on. When you turn it to the other side, it's
off.
on a different direction, actually. But yeah, it's off for the first direction. That's electronics are a little bit complicated. But it's not that bad. So it's just a switch that is a 2-position switch.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily on and off, but it is on in something else.
Yeah, and these are actually like a weird 3-position sort of thing. But that's pretty nice because it's nice to have a weird nuanced element. Tilt switches are made to trigger something, probably. And what a trigger would mean is just that when you hit it
or turn it,
something inside of the electronics goes on and happens and changes.
So that's called an event, right?
It's an event, yeah. But I can kind of have soft events with these.
So what is a soft event?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of making up a term, but it's like if it can be partly on, or it can be on for a brief moment. It can. Well, did I answer the question about what a tilt switch is well enough? Yes, I suppose I did.
Maybe, yes.
When I trigger keys with this, it's not going to sound like me playing them with my fingers.
Oh, that's true. Right.
As I shake around, it's going to bounce over the different elements, and you might get sort of a stuttering, just different effects. And it's more complicated than that.
It's a little bit more complicated. So if you've ever messed around with a MIDI keyboard, they differ in their sensitivity. So like sometimes when you press it down, it's just like a key, like off, on.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it has what is called like a weighted balance. And that's
velocity sensitive.
Velocity sensitive, and there are more kind of filters and controls on like how long in it, if it can sense how hard you're pressing and all that stuff. But mostly a keyboard is for touch, which makes it really difficult to say have a sound like a horn because the horn doesn't go off and on. Just like a finger press.
And that's a good example, but I would never do something that would mimic a horn or something like that.
No,
that's another
but the
form
thing
of
is,
my neurosis.
but the thing is, if you
anything.
want a horn sound, you have to have a breath controlled.
It becomes more organic. Can we put it that way.
So then like there's a variation of pitch and time and velocity and all these things, and so what you're doing is you're not mimicking a horn, but you're doing something completely different.
Yeah, well, like so, a lot of people when they want to make interfaces that are complex, they want to say you walk in front of a light and it turns something on, and then you touch you touch a metal panel and it conducts through you and does something else. A lot of people use Arduinos for stuff like that. And Arduino, I've never used an Arduino, but I know that it's just an interface that is pretty simple to program, relatively speaking.
That's the whole idea of it, right?
Yeah, and it allows you to work with different
inputs,
different sorts of inputs, and control how that interfaces with the computer. One nice thing about the way that I approach things, and the nice thing about using elements that have characteristics that sense their environment, is that you don't have to program and you don't have to catalog that many different moves, and you can still get something really nuanced. It's going to have what may be perceived as flaws in triggering, and that's nice.
Is that because it's like rolling around or half on?
Because it's rolling around. I found that when I have it upside down in the very middle, it even triggers a third trigger within these things. So that there's just weird results, and it's made a little more complex and simpler depending on how you look at it. Simpler for me because this keyboard only has 10-note polyphony, and in theory,
which means polyphony means
how many keys you can play at one time.
Correct.
And so, although there may be way more than 10 keys pressed down, you'll only hear 10 keys. And as I shift around, it will untrigger things. That's mostly what my jacket is going to be doing. It's just untriggering things at different moments. And that will sound good because it has a ring modulator in it, which is sort of a whole other matter. But
what does a ring modulator do to sound?
A passive ring modulator is the same as any ring modulator, but a little bit more open.
Does it make a ringing sound?
Well, it's an analog. It's known for having kind of a ring to it. Mostly what people think of when they hear a ring modulator is, I think it's a sine wave going into one input and then whatever else going into another input. So
and then mixing the two, right?
Well, it mixes the two in a complex way where it multiplies the volume of one signal by the volume of another signal, and it divides the volume of one signal by the volume of another signal, and then adds the three together. And it does the same thing with pitch. Multiplies one pitch by another, divides one pitch by another, has 3 signals, puts them together, and then those harmonics make kind of a ring. This is a way that I can learn by experience and achieve results that somebody wouldn't necessarily achieve. For instance, if I approach this as an engineer, if I really had a specific process in mind that I wanted to achieve perfectly.
Like
then
you wanted to make a guitar sound like a trumpet, for example?
Yeah, then I would probably take a certain amount of pride in not having all sorts of weird flaws. And I rather revel in those flaws, depending on what they are. The ring modulator thought.
Oh, yeah.
The nice thing about that is when I press down 10 keys at one time, rather than it making a complex chord out of 10 keys, like Henry Cowell, it'll sound instead like it blends all these harmonics together in a way that creates a polyrhythmic shifting sound. That's what the ring modulator does. I don't know. When you hit one key, it probably won't even come through because it's not mixing two sounds together. It's not a big enough sound. The more pitches you add into the sound that's going through the ring modulator, the louder it is. But it also becomes instantly a matter of what timbre you're playing. Hitting more keys and different keys will change the timbre because it changes the interactions of the harmonics. I suppose my plan for my output is I want to have a performative noise band, and I don't have to really work that hard to achieve that. I do work hard, but I work hard because I want to make new ways of doing it every time. Like this thing, I didn't know I was going to work hard. I didn't realize like there are 49 keys on this, and there are 3 25-pin D-sub connectors.
I see that.
There are 50 wires that had to go to 2 of those D-sub connectors, and then something like 5 or 6 or 8 that went to the other one for something else that's not interesting. That was a lot of work. This was a big project.
So just like you had to breadboard everything out and like pin it down and like all that stuff?
I pretty much just went straight from the circuit boards that were in there and prayed that nothing snapped off. And I'm good at it now. I don't really break stuff.
Where do you play? When you do play out, where do you play out? What are the kind of... Where can somebody catch you if they want to?
I have not played a show, I want to make sure this is true, in 5 years doing any kind of music at all. I got really involved in my filmmaking, and I stopped at one point and made a big electronics project, but I haven't shown hardly anybody, except like on a one-on-one basis. I haven't really shown anybody what I've been doing all this time. And meanwhile, I'm kind of aware that I can do bigger projects now. So now I'm going to play some shows. I've been working pretty vigorously on this thing, honestly, for about a year. It's not to say that it took a year. I moved 3 times during that time and had to send away for parts, and I don't know. There were delays. Chaos came at me.
Like it does.
Yeah. I mean, this is housing in the Bay is no small part. But,
right.
But now it's finished, and I'm going to play shows. I don't have any scheduled yet.
Sure. We'll keep an eye out for you.
Yeah.
And, well, you said you changed your name a bunch.
I figured I'd start calling it Fertilizer.
Okay. Well, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having this conversation here on Method to the Madness.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I'll have a conversation anytime.